we need like strong, confident candidates who can make a case for themselves. And more importantly, people who are willing to own their past record and explain why they think differently today. It's okay to say that you've changed your mind. It's totally fine. I've been there, most people have been there. The question is, do you deny changing your mind? Do you pretend like you've always been perfect? Or do you take ownership of mistakes you've made in the past?
All right, everyone, buckle up because today we're diving into Anna Kasparian's reaction to Joe Rogan's commentary on Kamala Harris. This one is spicy. Joe Rogan is calling out Kamala for dodging tough questions about her record, particularly on her flip-flopping marijuana legalization, while Anna attempts to defend her. Spoiler, this discussion exposes how politicians refuse to own their mistakes and how the media spins it. Let's unpack the drama and get into it.
We knew that she was going to be in Texas. So I said, open invitation.
Right. You said you can come whenever you want.
Anytime. You pick a time, I will be here.
And you would have been the best person for her to talk to because you're not going to attack her. You would just ask her questions, but that's the problem. I don't know if she'd be able to answer those questions.
I'll ask her a question, but I think they had requirements on things that she didn't want to talk about. She didn't want to talk about marijuana legalization, which I thought was hilarious.
Why?
Like, that's so... Because of her prosecuting record.
Oh, well, I mean, that was her old job, though.
Yeah. And, you know, she put a lot of people in jail for weed.
Oof. According to Joe Rogan, the topic of marijuana was an absolute no-go for the Harris campaign. He says it was one of the topics they told him was off limits if she did, in fact, agree to come on his podcast. But why? Well, during the election cycle, it wasn't until the end of September that Kamala Harris came out in support of legalizing marijuana on a federal level. And as Rogan said, she may have been hesitant to talk about it because of her prosecutorial record. And this was something that progressives were actually very critical about when it came to Kamala Harris during the Democratic primary in 2020. So as San Francisco district attorney from 2004 to 2011, Harris oversaw over 1,900 convictions for cannabis violations. There's a cannabis violation in my household on the reg. Like, it's just unbelievable to think about how many people had been thrown in prison over this, over pot. But let me continue with that graphic. Still, only a small number of those people actually ended up in prison, and that's important to keep in mind as well.
Let's call this out for what it is, a half-hearted attempt to soften the blow on her record. Whether it was a small number or not, Harris's prosecutorial choice contributed to a broken system. Spinning it now doesn't erase the damage.
Also, usually there's like a plea deal. So if someone was thrown in prison for what appeared to just be simple marijuana possession, typically they pled a more serious offense down to simple possession. But nonetheless, we all know that people have been thrown in prison in the past for marijuana possession and marijuana related crimes. And she was one of the prosecutors who carried, those convictions out.
By the way, make sure to leave down in the comments your opinions and thoughts. This is a place for discussion. Also, be sure to give us a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Let's get back into it.
Then fast forward to 2018 when she co-sponsored legislation with Senator Cory Booker to legalize marijuana federally. So maybe she didn't want to talk about like her evolution. Maybe she didn't want to explain where that evolution came from, but she did talk about marijuana on another podcast appearance. Here's what she said on the All the Smoke podcast.
I just feel strongly people should not be going to jail for smoking weed. And we know historically what that has meant and who has gone to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I just think we have come to a point where we have to understand that we need to legalize it and stop criminalizing this behavior. And I've actually, this is not a new position for me. I have felt for a long time we need to legalize it. So that's where I am on that.
So I'm curious what you think, John, because for me, this issue is such a layup, and I don't know why someone like Kamala Harris can't just say, look, this is where the country used to be, and I regret that was the case. I have grown, I have evolved as a person, I've made mistakes. Here's where I stand on the issue now. I think that it's admirable when people take ownership of, misguided decisions or actions they've taken in the past, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's why I find it very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm inclined in this case to just take him at his interpretation of what the conversation was, but it's so confusing that it's hard to understand.
The defense here is weak at best. They try to act like Harris dodging Rogan's show is just confusing. No, it's not confusing, it's cowardice. A leader who can't articulate their stance under pressure shouldn't expect respect from voters. Harris had a golden opportunity to explain herself and bailed, and that's a part of the reason why we got the result that we got.
So she turned down a couple weeks before the election an opportunity to come on, partly at least, because she didn't want to talk about an issue that she has the right position on now. I don't understand that at all. It would be so incredibly easy to say, it was my job at that point to uphold the law, and that's what I did. It's also my personal prerogative to seek to change it, which is what I will do. I will legalize it. What I did when it was my job was, yes, I put people in jail. I didn't personally like that, but that was the law. I would say there are other people that want to do far more than just uphold the law. Donald Trump repeatedly talks about giving the death penalty to people who deal drugs, which is significantly worse than putting them in jail. Why would that be so difficult for her to say? And theoretically, maybe you could win Joe Rogan over because he doesn't seem to be aware of Donald Trump's history of making comments about killing people for.
Kamala dodged a chance to flip the script and highlight her supposed growth. Instead, she ducked a straightforward opportunity even as Rogan gave her an opening to win over skeptics. This wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was almost a failure to lead.
Dealing drugs. He certainly didn't bring it up when he had Donald Trump on. I feel like that was a very manageable situation.
I agree. I totally agree with you on that. Democrats need to wisen up to the fact that it's a brand new era in political campaigning and the old rules no longer apply. The old ways of campaigning and getting your message out aren't really as effective. And so when we're thinking about candidates, we have to consider whether they're comfortable making a case for themselves in a less formal format. And Joe Rogan's podcast is a good example of that, right? So
Rogan's podcast represents the new frontier of political campaigning, off the cuff, unfiltered, and authentic. If Harris couldn't handle that, how can she hope to connect with voters? This isn't just about Rogan, it's about adapting to the new times, and the candidates that are able to do that are the ones that are able to show what they're about and eventually win over voters.
it doesn't have to be Joe Rogan's podcast, but I think someone who's campaigning to be president of the United States should feel comfortable in their own skin and feel comfortable making a case for themselves off the cuff, without a prompter, without the need to demand editing after the conversation. You know, part of the reason why, this is according to Joe Rogan, you could choose to believe him or not, I think he's telling the truth. Part of the reason why Kamala Harris did not agree to an appearance on his podcast is because, well, first of all, they didn't want to do a 3-hour conversation. They wanted to do a 1-hour conversation. She didn't want to travel to Austin. She wanted him to travel to her in Washington, D.C. He doesn't do that for anyone, so he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Obviously, there were certain topics that were off limits, and then they wanted the ability to call for edits after the conversation. He doesn't edit anything. I mean, I was listening to a recent episode. I don't remember if it was JD. I think it was JD Vance when he went on Joe Rogan, and there was like a moment where like Rogan's mic went out, and like they didn't even edit that out. Okay, they kept it all in. And so this is all to say, we need like strong, confident candidates who can make a case for themselves, and more importantly, people who are willing to own their past record and explain why they think differently today. It's okay to say that you've changed your mind. It's totally fine. I've been there, most people have been there. The question is, do you deny changing your mind? Do you pretend like you've always been perfect? Or do you take ownership of mistakes you've made in the past? And I think the American people actually really like and appreciate when someone is willing to own up to their mistakes.
Anna's right on this point, but here's the kicker. Kamala Harris doesn't do this. Instead of owning up, she spins her past actions to fit the current political narrative. You can't rewrite history just because it's inconvenient. Leaders who admit their mistakes earn trust. Unfortunately, Harris doesn't do that nearly as much.
So, look, it's too late for Kamala Harris. It's too late for this election, obviously. But I think that these are teachable moments that I hope the Democratic Party takes to heart moving forward when it comes to, vetting people and deciding whether candidates are worth promoting. What do you think, John? Final word.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that she could and should have done differently. Um, I know I'm trying to weed through all the different variables, figure out what my personal ranking of them is. I don't think that if she'd gone on, it would have changed the result, but that doesn't mean that she shouldn't have gone on anyway. And I think it would have been a great opportunity specifically to talk about that issue. It's the sort of thing that theoretically could have won some people over.
Mhm.
She could have talked about it's definitely a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I also agree that, Rogan's podcast didn't make or break her campaign, but it was, a symbol. It was like one of the issues that we had with Kamala Harris throughout the entirety of the campaign, her inability to really make a case for herself.
This clip showcases why voters feel disconnected from politicians like Kamala Harris. Rogan exposed the avoidance tactics of her campaign while Anna struggles to excuse it. At the end of the day, Rogan's unapologetic approach to interviews shines a light on how scripted and shallow modern politics have become. If you want to earn trust, stop dodging tough questions. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts or opinions down in the comments below if you agree or disagree with a lot of the points that were made here. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe, really helps out the channel. We'll see you guys in the next one.